All right. Well, it's 1:05. And so in respect to your schedule, because you've been so generous in taking some time from your day to come and speak with us, I'm just going to proceed with the introduction, then I'm going to turn it over to you. Okay, so friends, please join me in welcoming our closing keynote speaker, Dr. Keri K. Stevens from the University of Texas. Keri is a professor of organizational communication technology, a distinguished teaching professor, and co-director of the influential Technology and Information Policy Institute. I was going to say TIPI, but I'll define the acronym first. In the Moody College of Communication at the University of Texas, Austin. Her research program examines the role of technology in organizational practices and organizing processes, especially in the context of crisis, disaster, and health. She is the woman for this moment. She has authored numerous articles that have appeared in research journals, proceedings, and books, and received 23 top paper and panel awards at conferences. Her two most recent books are New Media in the Times of Crisis, and that's from 2019, and the two-time national level award-winning book, Negotiating Control, Organizations in Mobile Communication. That is really interesting. Keri has led over $3.4 million in external research funding, and I'm sure that number is even bigger now, from organizations like the National Science Foundation, Merck, Facebook, the Texas Department of Transportation, and she's the associate editor of Management Communication Quarterly and the chair of Mobile Communication Group for the International Communications Association. In her spare time, Keri also teaches graduate and undergraduate courses in organizational communication, communication technologies, grant writing, communicating to build sales relationships, communication studies, and internships in those areas. She is the founding co-chair of the joint Macomb-Moody Professional Sales and Business Development minor. She has published with over 40 different graduate students, 15 undergrads, and 8 industry and community collaborators. And her teaching has been honored at the university level with the President's Associates Teaching Excellence Award, the Eyes of Texas Teaching and Mentoring Award, and the Academy of Distinguished Teachers at UT Austin. So I cannot imagine a better speaker for us to welcome and address our theme of research in the time of COVID-19. Today, Keri will share with us our closing keynote address, and it's entitled The COVID-19 Pandemic, Research at the Edges of Chaos and Stability. Please join me in welcoming Keri Stevens. Okay, I'm going to stop my share, Keri, and turn it over to you.
Sounds great. Well, thank you all so much. I'm really excited to be here with you. I am going to share my screen now, and we will get things started. So I'm going to kick things off and talk about, I kind of knew this was coming. And here's how I knew it was coming. I did a lot of travel, more than I normally do, between December and March of 2020. So I was seeing people even wearing masks in airports at that time, especially when I would fly through San Francisco. I also co-authored a paper, and one of my collaborators collaborated extensively with someone in Wuhan and in the labs in Wuhan. And so I was getting firsthand knowledge of what was about to happen at the end of January. I also have a lot of friends with ties in China, and they would also tell me, Keri, this is more than what is being talked about in the news. And I had this sense that I should believe them. And so what I did is, when we ran out of hand sanitizer, I went out and bought rubbing alcohol, because what a lot of people don't know is that my undergrad degree was in biochemistry. So I'm actually this person who changed fields and became a social scientist at 30 and 9 months pregnant. So for those of you who are coming back to school later in life, hey, I was there with you. And then I cried for hours having to send my daughter back to her college. Both of my kids are now in college. At the time, only my daughter was, because she was an RA in the dorms. And, I have a background in understanding these types of diseases. And I just thought she was doomed and she would be in Chicago away from me. And I was very, very worried as this was happening. And then the lockdown happened. And I think that was a real shock for all of us. But it was weird because for me, the lockdown came and I was like, okay, let's just shift gears. And I really think in retrospect, a lot of it had to do with I had all of these warning signals way ahead of time. So I had time to kind of prepare that life was going to be in pure chaos. So here's what I'd like to talk about today. I'm going to talk about some of the ways that I created some stability out of the chaos, especially in that March through August time period when we were in lockdown. And then I'll share how chaos in personal life can kind of get interwoven in this. We'll talk about a time of stability again. I'll talk about chaos through rejection and success. And then I'd like to end by having some reflections and sharing with you some key takeaways. One of the things that I have been in retrospect fortunate to do is I've actually done a reflection essay on my time. And so I've had time to process things, and a lot of things I'll talk to you about come out of that reflection essay that I've done. So how do we create stability whenever we are in these massive situations? So I don't know how many of you have heard Herbert Simon's work on satisficing. It's one of my favorite words. So if you haven't heard of that term, it's kind of it means that you're not going to optimize situations, but instead you are going to accept that things are going to be good enough. And that's really what you're going for when you're satisficing. And I think that people who satisficed early in the pandemic were the ones who adjusted the most quickly. Because if we're running around trying to still be perfectionists and everything's falling apart around us, that's a really tough situation to be in. And so the first thing that I did is I created my home office. And I've always worked out of my house, but there were all kinds of crazy things I needed to do to be on Zoom all the time, right? And I also wanted to normalize the fact that our home offices, I had students who were Zooming in from their closets because it was the only quiet place in their home. And I'm sure many of you have experienced that. And I wanted to normalize the fact that, my office, I don't even have a door to my office. So who knows who's going to be wandering in at different times. Now, you'll notice I've shifted my office since I took these pictures, but that piano, that bookshelf, it's still right back there. So I turned my formal dining room into my office because this is where I had to live. And in case you're curious, I do have, let me see if I can't hit in the chat here. I also found that a lot of my colleagues were really, really struggling during this time, especially people who didn't have any experience working with either technology, and I've always worked with technology in all of my research. And so I created some videos, and I'm sharing my YouTube channel because some faculty asked me to create a video about how do you make your space work for you. And so I started creating some of these videos. My students then found out that I had created these videos, and they asked me to make one for them. And so I ended up doing a whole bunch of YouTube videos, and I've always taught hybrid classes. So I'm super lucky and incredibly privileged that I already had some expertise in this. So I decided, how can I give back and how can I share? So that's something of what I did. So I'll make those available to y'all as well. So the other thing I did is I tried to create stability by controlling what I could. I reworked my courses like all of us did to be completely online. I took all my travel funds that I had and I rebudgeted them and ran an online study with a panel. And then I had something that ended up turning out incredibly well that I had no idea if it would work, called a data analysis party. Let me tell you what these are. So when we meet in person with a data analysis party, it's anytime somebody has a great big data set, either qualitative or quantitative, and we all get in a room and we bring balloons and we bring coffee and donuts or whatever we're going to do, and we play with data. We have a data analysis party. So I tried this online and I opened it up to everybody. And, you know, our goal, I sent this out as the goal was to connect what you've learned in your stats classes with real world data. We had a large data set, 790 participants. And so I told them what our research questions were in these different parts of this data set. And we all got together online and it worked incredibly well. The students who attended, it's a come and go event. And even online, we could go for half a day and people seemed to get a whole lot out of it. Next thing that I did is I have a lab group of graduate students, and they really were craving social support. And I had a fabulous graduate student who ended up creating a lot of lab structures so that we could meet more often and so that we could do things that were meaningful for my teams. And it totally shifted from what we did before the pandemic. Before the pandemic, we would talk about research almost every meeting. And during this time period, it became having small groups to, like I heard y'all talk about a while ago, how can we build more empathy into our graduate school experience, into our research experiences. We would have guest speakers on completely different topics than we had ever had before. And it was a very positive experience for all of us. The other thing that happened is one way I controlled what I could is I just made myself really busy. Now I'm lucky that I was able to do that because yes, I had a child who was at home who during the day, but he was a senior in high school. And so that's a little different experience than people who had small children. However, the cool thing is that my collaborators that were on this grant that I wrote, you know, a couple of them have really small children. And we wrote this rapid and we got it very quickly. And so we dove into a project. And I'm going to tell you some about this project because there were a lot of mechanisms that we did as part of this that just worked. And so you're going to notice I have colleagues from George Mason, Brigham Young. My community partner is out of the National Capital Region. We had 5 students that were involved, and MCERT, our Montgomery County Community Emergency Response Team members. And I say they're part of our team because I feel like we just about lived online with them for a couple of months during lockdown. So we got a lot of stability within our project because we were fortunate that none of our collaborators got COVID. All of us worked from home and all of us were trying to stay busy, and we were really committed to this project. We also innovated quite a bit, and we had originally talked about doing all of our interviews in person on this, but we of course pivoted, like I heard many of you talk about pivoting, and we did our interviews and our observations through Zoom. And in a minute, I'm going to share a link because some of the things we did, I think could be helpful to others who may not have done this yet. And we ended up collecting really amazing data. So just to give you a little bit about that project, our kind of guiding question here was, how do we find actionable information from social media for emergency responders? And since we had a community member part of our management team of our project, he was able to tell us exactly what was meaningful for them and what wasn't. It was a really fantastic way to kind of do research that was very community engaged. And so you'll notice here, this is a copy of the interface that we used. And what we ask people to do is they would get a tweet. This is an example of a tweet violating social distancing, shopping in a crowded Walmart. And they would label it as prevention, risk, and then they could also label it as positive sentiment or negative sentiment or irrelevant. And I'll share with you a little bit about the way we were doing that. We used a system from my George Mason colleague called Citizen Helper. And one of the first things that we had to do is the CERT volunteers who participated, gave them some keywords to start training their machines. And then they started getting some tweets and they would label what those tweets were. And what our social science team did is we would get on with them while they were labeling the data, and we would interview them and observe them. And we used a think aloud kind of strategy, and we would have them articulate what they were doing. Now, this was weird, and I'm going to show you some pictures in a minute and share with you some of the things. You're in their home with them, really, because you're observing people and interviewing them through this platform that we've all had to learn to use. The results were fed directly into the emergency operations area of Washington, D.C., and we had a lot of people that were involved and analyzed a lot of data. So some specific things, I talked about that first round where we observed 15 different CERT team members, and in 3 separate 1-hour sessions. This ended up being key. And I think that for many of you, I've heard that you do interview research. A lot of times we only interview people at one time, and we're hopeful that we can get an hour. Well, we actually did repeated interviews with the same person. I think that in an online platform, that ended up being the very fortunate strategy that we did, because if we had any technology problems the first time we got on, we got to kind of make that time up in our other 2 interviews. Then, and this is what's really different, we went back to we had 8 of those same participants who participated in round 2 of this data analysis. And this time, instead of them looking at a tweet and labeling it, they looked at a tweet that the computer had pre-labeled. And their job was to correct the computer, to correct the artificial intelligence system. By the way, that's something they found a much harder task than task 1. I'll talk about that in a bit more. We got through 61 total interviews in that summer of 2020, so we stayed pretty busy. Here's some of the kind of fascinating findings that we have that are out under review right now. And one of them is this difficulty that they felt when they were correcting the machine. People would talk about the system like a puppy and that it needed training. This is a computer. But then they would have a lot of hope and they would say, but the computer is so capable of learning. And then we had other people in our study that were like, it's just a computer. Yeah, it's doing what we programmed it to. So we learned a whole lot about how people are thinking about their interactions with a piece of technology. We also learned a lot about how important it was to train these community emergency response team members to do this task. However, the cool thing was almost anybody could do this task. And our age range of people who participated was something like 35 all the way up to 78 years old. And so we had quite a range of CERT team members that worked with us on the project. Now, we did get a methods publication out of this, and I'm going to also share that link with you. Copy it right fast. In case this is helpful, there's a couple of things in this that might be helpful. And one is we kind of walk through some of the behind the scenes challenges that you have when you're screen sharing and you're observing people in their homes. We also found that we were their help desk people, because depending on if people participate on a cell phone, on an iPad, on different kinds of laptops, the Zoom settings looked completely different and all those. So we had to learn how to troubleshoot all this. And that's certainly not what we were experts at doing in the beginning. And we missed the context of what was going on in their lives. And sometimes that would be a bit jarring in the interviews, but we overcame a lot of challenges. And I think in this paper, it's a methods paper. And so we share some of the key challenges that we overcame. The other thing we did is, this is my first time ever doing a publication, and it is in a proceedings, but we included links to 2 different videos to help people understand some of the tips that we had. And those links are inside of that URL if you follow that URL. All right. Then my daughter came home from college, and within a week, she had such a complicated kidney stone that we didn't want to go to the hospital. And she's had kidney stones before. She was on the floor for about a day and a half, and we finally decided we have to go to the hospital. And this was the first time really any of us had gotten exposure and been around COVID, and we were just scared to death. So I packed my bags. I was all prepared to stay with her and help her through this at the hospital. I knew I'd have to quarantine when I got back because I would have been exposed. But what happened instead is, when I got to the hospital, they said, "Oh, you can't come in because only the patient can come in." And so I totally felt helpless. And this was a pretty serious circumstance that went on for a couple of weeks. And they did surgery, and they couldn't complete the surgery at the time. And then there was the hospital said that you could only do surgeries that were life-threatening. So she had to live at the house with half of her surgery done, and then several weeks later go back and get it finished. I didn't get any work done during that time period because I was so worried about her. And when she was at the hospital, we couldn't communicate except through the cell phone. And I think that many of you probably have been through similar circumstances, but I absolutely felt helpless as a mother in that situation. And I think that I heard you all talking about, empathy as being so important. Thankfully, people showed me empathy, and it really helped me be able to show other people empathy moving forward. So then, to get stability again, we ended up writing that NSF civic planning grant, and we got it. And it was built on the study that I told you about. So our rapid. And so we then did more interviews and more focus groups. And as I'm sure Marcia can tell you, being a part of that program, it was very demanding of our time. But that seemed to kind of bond us even more as a group. And so we added an additional person who was a key community partner. We added a collaborator from Virginia Tech. We wrote our phase 2 proposal. We were all excited. We were like, this is just a fantastic project. And one of the things that really helped our team along the way is that we celebrated our successes. And as I look back and reflect on some of the best mechanisms we had, I think these celebrations were probably some of the coolest things we did. And we had big things that happened among our group. Our lead GRA got a dissertation grant from NSF. I was promoted. 2 of the colleagues got tenure and promotion. And we would literally all get together and just have Zoom celebrations. And, our community partner would make these really cool backgrounds. And I think for me personally, I really realized how much I have not appreciated celebrating success. And it's something I will take forward with me and make sure that we continue doing. And then we didn't get our phase 2 funded. And the weird thing was that the academics just kind of were like, oh, what a bummer. Oh my gosh. And then we were we picked ourselves back up and just continued. But our community partner was devastated. He had gone through and gotten paperwork done to be able to be a co-PI on our project. And it was my first time really, really being so connected to a community partner that we watched him struggle. And we've all committed to look for a way to fund this project, but literally none of us could touch the project for about 7 or 8 months. And it was primarily because we felt like we had let our community partner down by not getting our phase 2 funded. And by the way, y'all, you know that the chances of getting these things funded are really low. And so it's for people who do this for a living, we know that. But you bring a community partner in, they have very different expectations and new senses of responsibilities I've seen in these different mechanisms that NSF is using to fund things. So my stability, I wrote a whole bunch more grants. I ended up having success that I will probably never, ever have again in my career. But in the process of having that success, it created a lot of temporary chaos because I didn't have the infrastructure to do the projects that I was getting. And so, I was, once again, I was just like living on this edge of stability and chaos. And I received 6 grants in less than 3 weeks. And not everybody around me was supportive. But I worked with my associate dean for research in my college, and she helped me find really creative solutions. And I feel like I learned so much about using my resources. And we began, she really taught me a lot about understanding how to manage grants. I don't think I would have figured that out if I hadn't been in the middle of all the chaos going on with COVID-19. So if we look at now, spring 2022, I think it's hard for people. As a matter of fact, within the last 3 weeks, 3 of my close collaborators have gotten COVID. And it's a very difficult conversation to have because they almost have felt like, wait, I've avoided it this whole time. And now everybody's pretending like it's over and I'm getting COVID. And we're having more instability about team projects and collaborating this spring than I've actually had throughout the pandemic, which I don't know if that's a weird circumstance that I'm in, but I've found that a bit shocking. The other thing is the people around us are burned out, and almost everyone I know is just burned out. And graduate students, we've noticed that a lot of graduate students are really, really struggling at this time. But you know what? I have hope, and I want you to as well. I think that we're going to get to a point where we can take all these experiences and really learn from them. So I'm going to give you a minute to read. And those of you who might have stepped away or you're multitasking, because I know that's what we all do now in these, we've learned that well, take a minute and just read this paragraph for yourself. So I told you at the beginning that I got to write a kind of reflection chapter in a book. And I looked up, in my field, we use a lot of Carl Weick's work on sense making. And so I looked up some about complexity. And I've always been that person who, I know this is so nerdy that I'm admitting this, but I've always been this person who looks to literature to help me cope and make sense of what's going on in the world. And I found these pieces and I was like, this is it. Because I was living between chaos and these brief forms of stability, we innovated like mad. And I would invite each and every one of you to look back, no matter how chaotic you think the last couple of years have been. I bet anything you did some things that were really innovative. And I didn't even realize the things we had done that were innovative until I engaged in my own sense-making activities. And this quote also really allows me to admit the fact that, and once again, my heavy nerd is going to come out. In the chapter, I even go on to talk about It's kind of like my days in biochemistry when I learned about the way that molecules behave and everything kind of bounces constantly. It helped me understand why I'm burned out. It helped me understand why sometimes I have all this surge of energy and I'm so excited. And then sometimes I just want to go to bed. And it's because we're living right here on these edges of chaos and stability. So my takeaway is hope, y'all. I have really learned that the fact that I was fortunate enough to kind of have an inkling that it was coming was really helpful. And in the future, I'm going to use that even when I'm caught off guard to help me prepare quickly. And I'm also going to trust my gut. I had a mentor when I was my first job out of college. So I was 21 years old. Dahlia Riley would take me under her wing and she would ask me my opinion about something. And then she would say, your gut's good. You need to trust your gut. And I was very fortunate that I got mentored into trusting my gut. But I actually think that there were times in the pandemic when I didn't trust my gut. I still remember I took the bottle of rubbing alcohol that I had bought and I put it on a rag in a Ziploc baggie, and I would walk into the restaurant and I would wipe down all the spaces and look at the servers and say, oh, I'm really sorry. I don't want to offend you, but I just think something's going to come and I just want us to be really careful. And my family laughed at me when I would do this. But you know what? My gut was right. And I also started wearing masks before anybody was talking about wearing masks too. The other thing I think a takeaway here is recognize that chaos can be temporary. Now, we don't know how long it's going to last, but I think acknowledging that we're in chaos is really important. But then also hold out that hope for when the chaos becomes a little more stable. And all my grad students will tell you, and colleagues, that written up on my wall is control what you can control. And that's kind of the mantra that I have lived by, I would say, most of my adult life. Remember that innovation can really happen on these edges between chaos and stability. And so whenever we feel out of control, really look deeply to see if there aren't things that you can do there that you'll never be able to do when you're not on those edges of chaos and stability. And then I think all of us have to remember that exhaustion, hopefully, is temporary, but we also have to take responsibility and take care of ourselves in the process of doing that. So quick review, we talked about creating some stability out of chaos, dealing with chaos in personal lives, finding ways to get more stability. Once again, chaos that comes with rejection and chaos that comes with success. This is not something people talk about. It's something that people will not empathize with you about. However, it's really important to realize that sometimes success can create chaos in your lives as well. And then in the reflections and the key takeaways, I hope that it's made you reflect. And I really want, as we open this up for questions, I want each one of you to think back. Was there a way that you innovated? Did you do something that you've never done before that you need to jot down somewhere so that you can replicate that, even in a time when it's not crisis? For example, I actually think I will continue doing Zoom interviews with certain populations. By the way, I also, like the back burner comment that was made earlier, we couldn't do one of our projects that had to be done in the field. We've left that on the back burner because it's with a population that didn't have access to technology. And so we couldn't do Zoom. However, with populations that have access to technology, we figured out some pretty good ways to do Zoom interviews. And I think that's an innovation and a very positive thing that's going to come out of us having to learn to adapt and pivot. All right, so with that said, I'd love to open it up for questions. And I really do appreciate you all having me here today. I hope this has made you think about some new and different things and invited you to also sense make and focus on the innovations that you've had during our times of chaos.
Keri, that was absolutely wonderful and just struck so many really meaningful chords. Thank you for putting all of the thoughts that were in our heads together and on slides for us to consider. So do we have any comments or questions for Keri at this juncture? I know my mind has just been going during this whole time. What, as we wait for hands to go up there, I think about I got to know Keri through the civic program, which is a very community-centered program, as Keri discussed. And one of the things that we did in the many hours of additional engagement with other people in the program area that we kind of weren't warned about, but that was okay, because they were always very useful sessions, was one of the small group moderators that we had there talked about the importance of planning for chaos in blue sky time, because you are in no position to plan for it in gray sky time.
Yeah.
And so I really took that to heart. And in my own practice, I learned to become much better at documenting what I was doing so that I have something to turn back to, because when I'm in a chaotic frame of mind, starting something from scratch is just really not possible, or possible in a way that would be as effective as if I had something to go on. So that's just an example. Anyone else want to share an innovation or a question?
Michelle, I see your hand up.
Hi, thanks so much. That was fantastic. Thank you. And I just want to stress, you brought up a million really important things, but the thing that resonated with me, I put it in the chat, but I think it's worth bringing it up again, is that anytime we're doing community embedded research, and we don't talk about it enough, those of us do action research, radical action research, community embedded research, whatever model it is that we're using, we don't talk enough about what happens with our community partners when that funding proposal doesn't get funded, or we go through a dry spell and we're having to cobble together things that to us on the academic side are like, well, I mean, it's disappointing, but okay, next. And as you point out, can be so devastating for the community partners. And I thought it was helpful to hear how you had managed that and to acknowledge the deep difficulty that it caused. And I wondered if you had anything more that you wanted to share about that specific thing.
Actually, I do. And thanks for raising that. We all let it sit for about 9 months, and the academics went on to their different projects. But then we've already started sparking up new conversations around that project. And we're going to bring in another community partner to work with our community partner as we move forward in the project. The other thing we did is we invited him to be a co-author on a paper that was just accepted to ISHCRAM, which is a crisis and emergency response conference. And we're going to be presenting it in May. And in it, we talk exactly about this. So I will I pre-prepared my links, but I didn't think about giving you a link to that paper. It's not earth-shattering scholarship, but it is very reflective of the different reward structures that are present in academia versus a community partner's life and organization. And we're honest in the paper about the struggles that we went through as a team. And I actually feel that by writing that paper, we've gotten together now for happy hours. And I think it's going to rebuild. I hate to say we actually lost trust, but it actually really did kind of harm our partnership because we didn't get funding, and it was out of our control, but I feel like we're rebuilding that now. So I'll be glad to share that paper.
Thank you very much, because also what everybody here knows is that, this reflective is one of my very favorite words on the whole planet. And that was the other thing that I really loved about your talk and your approach, is the amount of reflexivity that's built into it, and specifically that you've actually presented as scholarly output. I mean, whether you say it's the most scholarly paper, whatever, the fact remains is that it is very important scholarly output that's an important part of the research dialogue. And I'm just really grateful for you. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. We didn't know if it would get accepted, you know, because it's a different kind of writing, but I kind of try those things every once in a while now. And I'm amazed at how many times people appreciate more of an out of the box approach to some of those papers. And the feedback we got was really positive. Other questions, y'all?
Just to build on that for a moment, you know, we're always wanting to get into our research participants' world, and we don't bring them into our world. And sometimes that mutual understanding is, I'm not so sure, you know, trust is definitely a word that describes it, but it's also kind of an intimacy that sharing and just really a mutual understanding, I think, that deepens that relationship.
It is. And I'm looking back here. Oh, I have it at my other office. One of the things that they do in the emergency response community is they create something called challenge coins. Is anybody familiar with this concept? At the end of an activation, they create, and they're just these simple coins, but they document the experience. They are considered a symbol of celebration of completing a mission. And our community partner went out and got challenge coins for all the academics and all the students on our project, as well as all the community emergency response team members. And, you know, I got mine, and it's displayed at my office on campus. And I shared it with the students, and they were all like, wow, we've never gotten anything like this. And it was such a meaningful kind of symbolic, and all these things cost 75 cents a piece. Okay. That's the other thing I think that is amazing. I'm actually thinking of the group that I'm a part of at the International Communication Association, and I chair it this year. I just submitted my paperwork this morning for us to go before the board to become a full division. And we've been through a lot as a group. And I was actually thinking about getting challenge coins printed for that group, because it's something I could carry with me to France to that conference in May. And it wouldn't cost that much to do. And it's such a symbol of, it is an intimacy. It is a celebration. And I think that if there's one thing that I've changed about myself due to the pandemic, it's realizing how important celebrating is. I have never done that enough in my career. I've never done that with my students and with my colleagues. And it's just wonderful, I think, to find ways to celebrate our relationships in addition to the work that we've done together. We all need challenge coins going through COVID-19, by the way, y'all.
Well, as a wise woman named Kelly Farquharson said, celebrate all the things.
Yes, absolutely. I do agree with that. We just don't make the time to do that. And I think that, you know, if there's graduate students listening to this, I think that my habit started in graduate school of, okay, I got that done, check it off my list, move immediately to the next thing. And I think I've done that throughout my career. And the pandemic, check this off, go to the next thing. And there are people around me now poking at me going, no, Keri, we need to celebrate. And it really made me stop and think, a lot of people need that. And it's good for me too, even though I've found these coping mechanisms. It's good. It's really good to celebrate.
Well, I think we can all agree that getting more positive in your life is never a waste of time. So that's an excellent point to end on. Are there any further thoughts for Keri?
just want to echo what you've said already, Marcia, that Keri, we're so thankful that you were able to spend time with us this afternoon. And I know you've also were very flexible with us on the timing and coordination of this event. And so I'm just so thankful. This was better than I could have imagined, and it was exactly what we needed to hear. I'm so thankful that you shared your experience, and the language that you used I thought was really powerful too. So I just really loved your presentation.
Well, thank you so much. I enjoyed putting it together. And, you know, the one thing that I will tell everybody is, even though we're really busy, if you can find an excuse to write a chapter, an article, a 2-pager that can get you something that's reflecting on your own experiences, I think that the sense-making process that I went through on that gave me so much insight into the kind of best practices that I will take moving forward. And it also made me feel a lot better about those situations. The chapter, and I'll be glad to share this, it should come out in the next couple of months. If anybody wants to read my chapter, I'll share it, because I start off with a story that whenever my office was the other way with the open door, I was doing an in-depth interview during that summer. And all of a sudden, finished an 1.5 hour long interview, looked at my phone because I always put it in the other room when I'm busy. And I had like 12 messages from my husband. And the last one said, "We're finishing up at the emergency room." And I called immediately. I was like, "What's going on?" He said, "I don't have time to talk." When they got home, I found out that my son had dropped a chisel on his toe and essentially almost cut it off, and they had to go get it sewn back on. And the crazy thing is that what happened behind me and is in the video that I interviewed is my son hopping around, dripping blood from his foot. Y'all, I never noticed it. I was so engrossed in what I was doing, and I'd created all of these mechanisms to try to be in my space in the middle of a room that has no doors, that I tuned it all out. And then I spent a week feeling like a terrible mother because I didn't even know my son was hurt. And so I reflect on that. And I think I had really beaten myself up a lot about that experience. And I didn't understand why I didn't notice, you know, and getting to write that chapter helped me make sense about a lot of things that I have done in the last couple of years of my life. And I feel a little better about it. I still can't believe that I had tuned it out that much, but I feel a little better.
Well, and I think we talk a lot about boundaries between work and life, or a balance between work and life, but perhaps we need to be positioning that as reasonable overlaps between work and life, because especially doing what we do is not 9 to 5. So there really needs to be a larger conversation, and hopefully COVID will spur this about, since most of us,
Yes.
you know, have now been working exclusively from home, what that overlap really can reasonably look like without pushing things away when you need to be engaged.
Yeah. I also know the literature a lot on different types of boundaries that people use with their technologies. And so I wrote, it could be in that chapter, it could be in another thing that I wrote. But one of the things I'm very concerned about is, now that our kids have become a part of Zoom conversations, our pets have become a part, I'm just very, very worried moving forward, whether people have really truly become more empathetic, or whether people are just judging everybody behind their backs. Because we have a lot of literature in organizational communication that would suggest that just because there's a policy that you can do something does not mean that everybody feels like they can actually take advantage of that policy. And I think we must revisit these issues, and we must find out from the people around us, honestly, what is considered acceptable moving forward. Because I think we've made a lot of assumptions, and I actually don't think they're right.
Well, Keri, that comment actually really nicely plays into something we spoke about earlier, which is these concepts of misinformation, disinformation also means norms that we cling to kind of unreasonably, that we're not interrogating deeply enough. And hopefully this is an opportunity for all of us to really stop and think about that. So I just want to thank you so much. I'm so sincere when I say that. I just can't imagine a better closing keynote address. Thank you so much for your generosity, for your time with us. And we're kind of at the end of our day. So we really benefited from your passion, your insightful comments, and I actually could sit here and talk to you for a long time about that and about the civic program and lots of other things. So we need to celebrate and we need to catch up. And
Let's do that. That would be great.
Thank you so much. And we love to end on a high note. And I hope that everybody enjoyed their day, and thank everyone for attending, even the folks who couldn't stay the whole time. That's just fine. A special thanks to our facilitators and panelists. Your generosity made this day possible. So be on the lookout with for an evaluation link message. And we hope you'll take a few moments to share your view and keep working to ensure this time together meets your needs and elevates your work, because that's what we're all here to do, is to take each other further. Special thanks to Keri Stevens, Emily Braga, great speakers, Sharon, who helped me think through that I should invite Keri, that you were the perfect person. That was absolutely true. Patrick for helping us find Emily, and Steve for just supporting whatever crazy thing I said to him along the way. So, all right, everybody. Thank you. And I see that the chat is stacking up with requests for your chapter, Keri. So we'll have lots of things to catch up about soon. Oh, and thanks for that contact information. Perfect. Great. Well, all right, everybody. 3 minutes early. I bid you adieu. It's going to be a beautiful weekend. Get out there and enjoy it. Thank you so much for contributing to this great event, and have a great weekend.
Thank you all. Thank you, Marcia.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marcia. That was great.
It was a good day. We had a good
I
day.
really think so. Excellent choice of speakers. Thank you, Dr. Stevens. And thank you, everyone. I really enjoyed it thoroughly. Have a good day.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.